Okay, so funny anecdotal story. Okay, filed under one of those things you're like, really? That actually happened. Later on in the show, we're going to do a Phantasm retrospective. You know, talking about the Tall Man and the and Reggie and Mike and all that. I have a very interesting interaction with um, Reggie Bannister's wife. Okay. Um, so those of you guys who don't know, Reggie is the ice cream man in the Phantasm, and over the course of the series, by Phantasm 5, Mike is no longer even the main character. It's really Reggie. And I actually was contacted by his wife regarding copyright infringement. So here we go. My very first book, Hiram Grange and the Chosen One, is basically an action adventure, pulp adventure about this guy. You know, he kills monsters and drinks a lot of absinthe and does drugs. And I had watched Phantasm in my college years. Like I am. They call them Phantasm fans. They call them fans, Phans.
Uh-huh.
And like a lot of fans, I discovered Phantasm after the fact. Like I was just trolling through, and I wasn't even really a horror fan yet, but I was trolling through Video King and all these movies, and I watched them all. So I had watched them, obviously, but I was writing Hiram Grange and the Chosen One, and I came up with a character, and I named him Reggie Bannister. I don't know where the name came from. Whatever. So the year that Hiram Grange debuted, I was at Horror Find that summer, which is a big horror convention that used to take place every year in Gettysburg. It was a great convention, so much fun. It's like Scares That Care is now. Which, Tom, when we're done with social distancing next
Mm-hmm.
summer, you are coming to Scares That Care with us because it's a great time. Basically, it's the horror film industry and the horror writing industry together. And I was debuting Hiram Grange and the Chosen One that weekend. Also, one of the featured guests was Reggie freaking Bannister from Phantasm. I didn't think anything of it. You know, I didn't get a chance. When you're at these cons, especially when you're a young guy and you're trying to make your bones, you're really there trying to sell books. You got a reading this. You don't get a chance to circulate as much. So I never got a chance to actually go see Reggie Bannister. I didn't get into the celebrity room at all. Much to my surprise and shock, a week and a half later, after it's all over, I get an email from someone named Gigi Bannister. It's Reggie Bannister's wife. And somehow, a copy of Hiram Grange and the Chosen One has ended up in her hands. And she's contacted me with concern that I've used Reggie's name. And Reggie's a well-known figure in the horror field, which he is. And she was concerned of the copyright implications. Now, my first thought was not oh my God, I'm going to get sued. My first thought was like, Reggie's wife, Reggie from Phantasm, has my book. That's the only possible. I don't know this for sure, but that's the only, like, none of the promotional materials has that. He was a side character who gets killed early on in the book. And there's no mention of his name in the promotion. So the only way she must have known is somehow a copy of my book ended up in her hands. That's the first mind-blowing thing. So I immediately, Tim Deal, who was the publisher of Cemetery Dance, or publisher of Shroud Publishing at the time, great magazine, and unfortunately publisher that went under, but they published my first book. So I contacted him, just like, are we in trouble here? And he's like, first of all, he said, you're not taking advantage of a copyrighted character. Because Bannister, I don't think, is ever used in the Phantasm movies. It's just Reggie. Reggie Bannister is his real name. He said, and your Reggie bears absolutely no resemblance to the character. So you're in the clear. You're not going to get sued or anything like that. So it was just this weird thing. And I guess to kick off my thoughts about this, and we'll see where this segment goes. Maybe this segment will go nowhere. it blew my mind that when I was writing this, and I had seen all the Phantasm movies, and I knew the name Reggie Bannister just sounded good for some reason. And this was also, I just never thought to Google it. I just thought Reggie Bannister. That sounds like a great name. Why do I like this name? And obviously, the reason why I liked it is because I was calling upon this thought of the movies, and it reminds me of. So I don't know if you guys know this, but Rod Serling and Ray Bradbury did not get along at all.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No. So it's a really funny story. Rod Serling wanted to do this thing called the Twilight Zone. He's like, I think I can do a TV show that's about science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and use it for my social commentary. And here's where the story's a little. Bradbury claims they were at a party. And Serling came to him and said, I'm doing this show and I have no idea about science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But then if you read Bradbury or Serling's autobiography, he talks about growing up and reading Lovecraft and Bloch and things like that. So maybe even, anyway. So Bradbury says, you should read this, you should also read my stuff, things like that. And then over the years, Bradbury was always convinced that Rod Serling was ripping his stuff off for the Twilight Zone. Mm. Rod Serling could never deny it because Rod Serling had an admitted bad habit. He read stuff so fast and then came up with ideas like this. Like, I know it's bizarre. Over a 5-year span, he wrote most of the Twilight Zone episodes himself, which is freakish, right? He would come up with his ideas so quickly that he could never tell really where he got that idea from. So he could never quite say, no, I would never steal from you. I don't think I did, but maybe. So it brought up to me the idea.
Piece and desist letter up, framed on his wall.
It's really, really interesting. In fact, the rivalry was so bad in the 70s or 80s, maybe it was the 70s. A writer named Constance something did this wonderful piece on Rod Serling. Bradbury was so upset, he wrote an entire murder mystery called Let's Kill Constance. That's the title of the novel, because this journalist named Constance had wrote this wonderful thing about Rod Serling. So Bradbury's like, fine, let's kill Constance, and he writes a novel with that title. So, but it got me thinking about, here's a really big English term. It's called intertextuality. It's the idea that all texts just refer to each other. And when we're talking about texts, we're talking about movies and shows too. Like, for example, my son loves Nexo Nights. And we're watching for the umpteenth time the Big Boss episode where the bad guy is ascended to his full powers. And he goes, "Hail to the king, baby!" And this is a show for 7-year-olds. And I'm like, really? and there's I don't know how many times I've seen like tentacled monsters. And this is really Cthulhu, isn't it? So I don't know if this segment's going to go anywhere, but what do you guys think about that? The idea that we're living, and I don't think it's either bad or good. I think it just is. That we're living in this postmodern age where we just either consciously or unconsciously channel all the stuff that's influenced us. Like, what do you guys think about that?
I would say when you have a more direct call out like that, when you're directly quoting a series, especially you see that actually a lot in a lot of kids' cartoons, where that's that little wink, wink to the adults that are watching as well. That's more of an Easter egg. I don't know if I would call that intertextuality, just because it's intentional and it's not really based upon it. It's more serving a function of directly referring to something else. But the intertextuality, I think it's unavoidable. I mean, we're all influenced by what we've read, watched, listened to. I don't see how we could possibly start from a clean slate when it comes to storytelling, because we're all, even if you've never seen a movie and you write a movie script, you've been influenced by how stories are told by adults telling you stories when you're a kid. So I think that filters into it. I don't think I certainly wouldn't call it questionable or even unknown. I think it's more of a It definitely does happen.
Mhm.
How much does it happen, and how much of it's a direct influence, and how do you, well, use those elements for your own storytelling?
Right.
I actually like hearing what the influences are for a writer, because it's you can kind of see where those threads come through. One I commonly cite is Michael Crichton, and I see a lot of the, take a situation where things have gotten out of control and the bringing in a lot of the suspense. And I think that's there. And if you read what I write, a lot of it has those Crichton-esque elements that are there. I'm not trying to write the next Michael Crichton book, but I certainly recognize that a lot of my view of writing suspense came from that, because he was influential to me in my reading.
Right. And it's very postmodern too. The idea that we're building. It's funny too because don't get offended, Tom. We're all Christians here, but Chuck and I know. Put it this way, I think the Catholics have done a much better job of writing spiritual fiction that reaches mainstream audiences, and unfortunately, evangelicals have not. And I'm sure.
Why would I be offended by that?
Well, because I know every time I said this, you'll be like, "I'm a Christian too," so I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, Tom, you sounded exactly like that. So
Yeah. So Chuck and I would know. Probably because Chuck and I both tried. I know I thought about it. I don't know if Chuck thought about it. We both tried to start we're thinking, I did anyway, thinking about starting my writing career in the Christian publishing industry. And I know their postmodern is like, that's bad. Because I don't think they understand the difference between postmodern social theory and postmodern literary structure. A postmodern literary writer is exactly what Chuck said, is informed by everything that's come before them, and that is the building blocks of their story. Like, they're indebted to that.
you own it. I think it's always been there, but I think with postmodern they own it, and that's why you get a lot of the indirect nodding to what's there, or pulling up at the 30,000-foot level above the conventions of the genre, because
Yes.
you know that it's there. You're acknowledging, yes, this is tropey because we've been dealing with this trope for so long, so let's pull back and examine the trope.
And then let's use it for our own purposes. That's why I'm really excited to have Lovecraft Country coming my way. And I'm also currently reading The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval, which is really supposed to be, again, putting a spin on, Lovecraft's. And again, I think that'll be a great discussion for us to have in the future. Is Lovecraft and his racism? What do we do with that? But I think a postmodern writer, not only does he know his history and he respects his history, but they they know their history, they respect their history, but they want to do their own thing with it. Tom, do you have any thoughts about this before I jump in? Because I'm actually going to make a book recommendation that goes along with this. But do you have any thoughts about this?
Sure, thanks. I thought you were just going to ignore me on that one.
I
You're
was
just here for-
completely.
Tom, you're here for the sex appeal.
That's right. We just want your pretty face up there so everyone will watch our videos.
The moneymaker's here.
That's right.
When you guys talked about that, now everyone is influenced by everything else. Like, you watch TV shows or movies, and for me, of course, as the history teacher, I see historical context. So it's impossible not to say that some writer influenced another writer, as long as they don't copy it, idea for idea. Like, I bring this up, like how movies and books are also based on the time period that they are created in. When we get to streaming, I'm going to talk about Doom Patrol and how one of the bad guy government officials, this general in charge of the Bureau of Normalcy, his aide brought him his lunch, which was a Big Mac in a McDonald's container. We knew exactly who they were ripping on for that one. So, yeah, everyone's going to influence each other. You can't ignore that fact. It's like, John Carpenter's A Thing from 1982 may have influenced this movie called Mimic, about these bugs that were gaining human features. Was it? No. Was it influenced? Probably.
Yeah. And very interestingly enough, just to throw this out there, my wife and I just finished watching Lock and Key. It was based on the comic graphic novel by Joe Hill, and we loved it. So we recently started a new show that's a little bit older called The Lost Room, and And in the Lost Room, so a lock and key has to do with these magical keys, and the most powerful key is the key that can open any door and go anywhere they want to. Well, in the Lost Room, the central part of the series is a key that opens doors and can go anywhere you want to. So it's like, did Joe Hill watch this at some point? Possibly. And how many stories have already dealt with keys that can go anywhere you want to? Not necessarily keys, but gosh, has anybody read The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis? I mean, then it was rings. It was a magical ring that could take you wherever you wanted to go. So that's really
that's really a style of what they call portal fantasy, and that goes back. Lewis is well known for it. I mean, the Chronicles of Narnia is portal fantasy.
So my recommendation. So if I were to give a recommendation, and maybe Chuck and Tom could think about this too. So I think in intertextuality, what we're really talking about is postmodernism. And I know I have a lot of fun talking about this with my 12 AP students because they start listing. We actually, side note, nerd alert. Every year, my 12 AP students read How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas Foster. It's a great, insightful, but very relaxed, casual book on interpreting literature. And we talk about, when you start talking about all these stories, have you seen that plot before? Come on. You know you've seen that story before. And it kind of blows the kids' minds a little bit because they're like, you're right. And this year, as part of that, we read, and I know, Chuck, you've talked about this before, and I'm really excited about this because Netflix is supposedly turning this either into a movie or a series. I hope it's a series because it'll be a lot better. Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Tom, if you haven't read this, I would love to lend this to you. So Head Full of Ghosts, on the outset, is about a family whose daughter is possibly possessed. And then, because the dad has been laid off, they have a TV crew come in to create a reality TV show based on their family and their daughter's possession. And it is the perfect example of a postmodern work. And I'm guessing, I've met Paul Tremblay. I don't know if you met him, Chuck. He was at... No, you weren't at Scares That Care this past summer. He was at Scares That Care this past summer. He's a great guy. You should be jealous because one night I was hanging out with both Paul Tremblay and Josh Mallerman at the same time. That was a lot of fun. But this is from my standpoint, I can't underspeak for Paul because Paul and I have never talked about this. This is a novel by someone who loves and respects the horror tropes of possession, exorcisms, but he really manipulates it to make it his own thing, and it's built on the foundations of what came before, but it is his own thing. And at the same time, he's offering us a really insightful, which is interesting too, because one horror film that has become huge in the last couple of years is the found footage film, the mockumentary. So he's analyzing all this stuff at once, and at the same time, it's an absolute pleasure to read. Like, you're reading this going, okay, I could be really, yes, he's doing insightful things, but you're thinking to yourself, is she really possessed? I need to know. So it's a really, 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 really great book. Chuck, I don't know if you have any recommendations as far as like...
Actually, that's when you mentioned postmodern literature. That's exactly what I would have gone to. I think it's the preeminent picture of what postmodern literature can do. How you can take ownership of that position and that view of literature and just run with it and do something new and creative. So I highly recommend it. It reminds me a lot actually of talking with other writers conferences, talking online. There's a weird thing that happens when you go from being a reader and a movie viewer to being someone who actually writes those books and scripts.
Yeah.
You start to see the stories in a completely different way. Like, you can see the beats. And I know that it's not just writers who see this. I know people that are well-versed in literature and well-versed in cinema. They'll see it too. There's certain beats in the story structure. But you can see what's playing out. And you start to look at books and movies a different way once you start writing the same stories.
Yep.
It's a weird thing. You never go back to seeing that simple just first love of literature and first love of movies. You're always analyzing what's being done. It's similar to there's the experience you have of watching a magician, but once you start to learn how to do the magic tricks yourself and you know how they work, you start to analyze it in a different way. You're admiring the craftsmanship and the show that's being done and the skill of the performer, but you already know what's being done.
Tom, do you have any suggestions for books or movies that are like this?
No, I mean, I would have book suggestions, but I'm going to stick to that to the contemporary classics we're going to do later. I mean, you guys are the knowledgeable ones of whatever in God's name postmodernism is.
So anyway,
stuff.
So anyway, remember, if you think you've seen it before, you probably have.